Good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome again this morning. It's lovely to see you all here. I'm happy to be your MC this morning. We have some great panelists and great discussions coming to this room. First, I would like to thank again Canada 2020, the Centre for American Progress Action Fund, as well as the Action Network, the Global Progress Action Network, for bringing us all together. We will have today the theme of the discussion is power this morning. So the kind of questions that we'll be hearing discussed include, as power shifts, how do we make sure that it reaches and reflects our communities? Can the center left around the world ensure that power means delivery, agency, justice, and of course, opportunity? So let's get started. I am delighted to introduce the first panelists this morning, the panel entitled Power of Shared Prosperity, Rebuilding Trust Through Economic Security. Pete Buttigieg, he is the former Secretary of Transportation of the United States under President Joe Biden. My colleague, Canada's Minister of Industry, Mélanie Joly, and Daniel Sachs, Chair of the Daniel Sachs Foundation, CEO of P Capital Partners, and member of the board of Wallenberg Investments. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage and enjoy the discussion. Thank you.
Good morning, bonjour. It's a pleasure to be here with the two of you and with all of you. So we're clearly living in a new political and geopolitical reality. And as with all political dynamics, there's a supply side and a demand side to this. And I note that when we look at the media coverage and we have the conversations, we seem to be obsessed with the supply side of this political moment, with the Trumps, the Orbans, the Farages, the restrictive and repressive and authoritarian policies, and the alt-right movements, etc. But I think actually we would be better served spending more of our attention on the demand side of this political moment. Why is it that people are suddenly attracted to these kinds of ideas and these types of leaders, that they gain ground and also win elections? We've looked at this actually in Europe, and it turns out that very little of the incentive to move from the center to the fringes is about ideas and ideology and people actually finding those policies more attractive. There are really two key drivers of why people move from the center to the fringe. One is that people are desperate for change in their lives. And the second is the collapse of institutional trust. So people have given up on established politicians, political institutions to deliver on that change. And then you have upstream of that, there are a number of issues that drive this discontent. There's inequality that has been rising. There's the cost of living crisis in a lot of the world. There is the stalling of social mobility and the fractures of social cohesion. So basically, people have stopped believing that democracy and our established institutions can deliver a better life. In short, I think people are asking quite relevant and legitimate questions at this time. Can I afford my life? Can I be in control of my life? Can I offer my children a better future? So I think our task is clear. It's not to defend the status quo from authoritarianism and the far right. The task is to offer a better answer on these legitimate questions, an economy that delivers security and dignity, and institutions that are able to earn trust again. It is to find liberal, democratic, and progressive answers to those questions, and it is to reform our institutions radically so that they're relevant for people's lives. We need trusted and transformational institutions and public institutions to achieve that connection. So I want to start our conversation with the everyday pressures that people are feeling, because across, I think, North America and Europe, progressives and liberals have lost ground in this battle over people's everyday lives. And I want to start with you, Secretary Buttigieg, and not least from your experience as a mayor in the American Midwest, industrial Midwest. First of all, what is your diagnosis at this time? And what do you think are the key policies and governing choices that progressives need to make in order to gain back some of that lost ground?
Well, first of all, I'm very pleased for the chance to be here, and I think this is the question that needs to be at the heart of all of our policy as well as political strategy. And the simple answer is that we need to construct a politics of the everyday, which is what mayors live and breathe. It's certainly the orientation you have when you come up through municipal government, where you are judged on everything from snow plowing to whether the city that you lead just feels like a better or worse place to live. I think we certainly need to be practicing this at a national level. And many people are looking around and seeing that their circumstances have not improved. If you were born the year that my mother was born, at the end of World War II, there was a 90% likelihood in the US that you would end up economically better off than your parents. If you were born the year that I was born, in the early 1980s, it was a coin flip, 50-50. And now there's evidence that we're actually underwater on that in the US. So of course, people have a sense of policy failure that led to many people who don't even like this president as a person saying, you know what, I will vote for anybody who might make my life better, even if that means burning the house down, which of course is what we got. The problem, of course, is that none of the prescriptions coming from this White House are making people better off. For us, that represents an opening, which is not the same thing as a solution. People will listen to us because the tariffs have made families worse off, because a promise was broken around the Iran war, and for all of the other reasons that have Democrats at the moment seemingly in the ascendant politically. But my second greatest fear for my party is if we win in November, that we forget that a return to the prior status quo is not the right answer either. What we need is a series of clean bills, legislative projects that will deliver higher wages, that will deliver universal health insurance coverage, that will deliver things like paid family leave, all of which, by the way, are a set of things that command 2-to-1 support. So in a notionally 50-50 country, we actually have a great number of supermajority policies that, importantly, the center and the center left and the left agree on, and that the right is against. Clarifying battles around that, I think, are going to be very important in government, because we will either manage to get our way, because even the Republicans can't stop it, or we will make clear who's for and who's against things going into 2028.
Thank you. Minister, I mean, you have a different perspective, because you don't have to only think about these things, you have to do them, right? Yeah. So you're in office. And what's your perspective on this? How do we respond to these everyday economic concerns of jobs and grocery prices, and how do we kind of take back the initiative from more populist narratives?
Well, you know, first and foremost, I'm happy to be with all of you. Thank you, Dino, for being in the best country on earth. Thank you, Pete, as well. Welcome to Toronto. And I know, Pete, you're referring to snow plowing. I'll just leave it to that, you know.
You know all about that.
I think we have experience with snow plowing. On the question of linked to basically getting people's support, of course, we are dealing with US protectionism here at home and with a trade war. And my job in government right now, of course, is to support the Prime Minister and my colleagues, but it's also to really deal with the consequences of the tariffs. May it be the 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum, may it be also the tariffs on the auto sector. And so why I want to bring that up very quickly in the conversation, and I know we'll have more conversation on industrial policy, is that you need to be able to show that you're fighting for people. It is not only a discussion at the Royal York in Toronto. It is fundamentally going to meet with them, going if there's a plant closure, going on the picket line, meeting with the people, understanding their issue, showing that you're fighting for them, including with that rhetoric, and at the same time being able to convey all parties, including, of course, the business community. I'm in charge of industry, obviously, but labor people, and being able to be in solution mode and showing the work throughout. And so it becomes, real pragmatism, because you can, if you're losing your job, or your husband is losing his job, or your cousin is losing his or her job, and you're in charge of a small business in that community, everybody is affected. And of course, then it affects trust. To your point about the statistics of, is my life better or not? And so I think that's, and then we need to be able to show on the policy front, well, we have a plan. Here's the plan. We have an auto strategy. And meanwhile, you know what? We're investing in defense. We have a defense industrial strategy. And you know what? Maybe you won't produce the same type of cars, but maybe we'll be able to send you work to repurpose the plant to do defense production here. So that's what I think is important, because, right now trust is acquired. You can never take it for granted. And we need, as progressive, to be able to be not ideological, but I think very, very real with people. And actually also show them that it is for, it's not only politics, it's concretely showing results.
Yeah. So, and I know you're keen to talk about trade, and I think it does, because it's very deeply connected to the types of issues we're talking about. And of course, these first things that you've talked about are very much about kind of cohesion within a society and shared prosperity. But there's, of course, a broader question around shared prosperity in the global economy. And we've quickly gone from kind of global trade systems that were functioning reasonably well, et cetera, to a weaponization of trade and national interest and power. And it's very clear, I think, in the global system that we can't simply kind of strive to go back to what was before. We have to rethink a lot of that. And I think from your perspective, Minister, of course, there was a time when there was a sense of shared prosperity in North America, right? And now you're having to, together with your government, you're having to de-risk and diversify away from what you've called the overdependency on the US. That includes, of course, building alliances with new partners in Europe, aligning on industrial policy, and at the same time, and we see that. I mean, we talked about it before, and you called Sweden the best country on earth. I'm not sure, but there's a lot of collaboration between the Nordics and Canada, for example, Bombardier and Saab working together on industry and defense, etc. But at the same time, it would be utopian to assume that Canada could become independent of the US, right? So I'm interested in, again, kind of in concrete terms, how do you balance this? I mean, balancing between building those new alliances, protecting core industries in Canada like the steel industry, and at the same time not poking the bear in the White House too much.
Well, we still are the country that has the best access to the U.S. market, tariff-free, and our goal is to be able to engage with the administration and obviously to engage with our friends, the American people. At the same time, our goal is also to double our non-U.S. Exports, and so you see the Prime Minister going around and signing new trade deals across the world. Which is extremely important. We will have more than 50, by the end of the year. Now, the question is, on my side, is, well, we're a lot focusing on trade diversification. What you're seeing, a lot of countries are reacting to the tariffs, so to protectionism and to economic coercion. And what you're seeing right now is that either countries will be putting tariffs in, or there will be dumping. So then you have to deal with the impacts of dumping because trade is rerouted. And then afterwards, it's much more, how can we protect local production? And so you fall into more protectionism. And so we're talking a lot about trade diversification, but the phenomenon that we're profoundly seeing right now is actually new industrial policies that are not aligned. And then it becomes, how can you create common markets? Because you need to have industrial policies aligned. And so what we're working right now with the EU is greater integration, because, for example, on steel, well, we have an issue. If we're all affected by the 232 tariffs, the EU came up with a new initiative to put to protect basic foreign steel to enter the EU. And we're negotiating to be able to have an exception and to be able to export our steel there, and also our aluminum. And then from then on, you have a first, Europe was created through the Schuman Accords, through the steel and coal
Union.
Union. Yes, indeed, market. Well, first it was an agreement, and so if you're really creating more than trade, industrial policies align, and then you have indeed real businesses that are working together, then bit by bit you're creating this entire new system that will be lasting, long-lasting, because it's a flow of capital, goods, etc., but it's a flow of people, of trust that is going to happen. And so that's what we're doing right now. And I think that it is really, really important that our US friends understand what is going on, because we're doing that with the EU. We'll do it with others as well.
Yeah, so to our US friends.
Sorry, Pete. I love you,
Signal
Pete.
received.
Signal received. But let's talk about the signal, because I think, from the U.S. side, assuming that the Democratic Party wins, gains more power in the midterms and wins back the presidency in 2028. We can hope that here, right? You would be inheriting a very different global economy, geopolitical landscape, and trade environment after 4 years of both the kind of commotion and disruption that we're seeing, but also what you just talked about, the establishment of other alliances that kind of strengthen and become more long-term over time. So it wouldn't be possible or even desirable to go back to what was before, like we've talked about. So what do you think a Democratic administration should and will do when it comes to trade policy? And is America First here to stay in some shape or form? And what are you saying to people who are starting to give up on the US?
And everybody's listening right now.
Well, in practice, America First has really meant America alone. Every country puts itself first. So no one should expect anything different from any national government, but what has actually been behind this slogan has, of course, been a process of alienating friends and poking allies in the eye and dismantling some of the partnerships and friendships that, in fact, helped to keep America in first place, which I think is the real aspiration of the American people. And for our country to be leading, whether it's leading economically, militarily, or socially, it is important that there be an atmosphere in which people want to follow and find that following is in their interests. And you cannot bully people into that. Having said that, I believe many of the fundamentals that have led to these deep bonds go back decades or even centuries. Many of those fundamental elements are still there, and we should tap them while being unsentimental about just how much has changed. Look, the international order as we know it, many of the trading systems too, were built for a time and in a time that is just deeply different than now. And the political rupture or geopolitical rupture is not the only thing that has changed it. Even things like artificial intelligence, which is profoundly changing everything, is not the only thing that's changed it. So many of our assumptions and the corresponding institutions in our international system were developed, just to take one example, at a time when the majority of people in China were rural farmers or peasants living in poverty. Today, a middle-class city dweller in a Chinese city arguably lives a more sophisticated, technologically sophisticated day-to-day life than a middle-class American city dweller. We are just in a different world, and it is partly, but not only, because of what has happened politically in the United States. So I think what we need to recognize going forward is, first of all, that it will not just be the work of 4 years to establish the kind of trust and credibility and consistency that is needed. I think there are many in the US who recognize that that is a generational project. And at the same time, that it might not be so bad that that needs to happen on new terms. where there is a kind of a flying formation, where we hope America continues to hold and earn a leading position, or the leading position, but one where it makes sense for different players to be aligned with us. And I think that's increasingly in the US interest also, because to the extent that we are in rivalry with China, the level of scale that we are going to need is one that requires us to be in good coordination with allies and partners. But we will, of course, find that there are realms in which there are cooperation and competition. Having those overlap on less predictable patterns with different international partners could actually be a very healthy thing for our future institutional framework. I'm just trying to purge our vocabulary of pretty much anything that starts with the prefix re, like restore, rebuild, most of all, return. Because it's not going to be like that, and it shouldn't. There is a domestic equivalent in the US of the remarks that the Prime Minister made at Davos about how the old order is not coming back, and we shouldn't be nostalgic about it.
Thank you. I want to talk about something where a re is actually suitable, and I want to talk about the role of business. We've been working in Europe to mobilize business leaders in the private sector in defense of democratic resilience and institutional renewal and shared prosperity, very much in their own self-interest. And we used to know this, that business that's rooted in place and in a certain community or city or region is fundamentally dependent on a functioning and democratic society in education systems that work, in social mobility, in predictable institutions, in shared prosperity, in trust and social cohesion. And then I think we forgot some of that during the kind of most rapid days of globalization, because the connections were less clear, but it's still as true. And I think this is something we need to remember or relearn about how business fundamentally needs to live in symbiosis with wider society, and there's a mutual interdependency between business and wider society. So I think we need to engage business in the kind of project that you've been talking about. And what do you see there? What role do you feel that the private sector or business should be playing in strengthening democratic resilience and contributing to shared prosperity? And also, I think, if we could start with you, Minister, in this time of economic insecurity, how do you engage business as part of national resilience as well?
Yeah, of course. Well, listen, I think that if you were in a business, if you're in charge of a business now, and you were in charge of that business 4 years ago, if you're in North America, I'm not saying in Europe, but in North America, geopolitical risks are new to you. Okay, of course, the war in Ukraine changed the dynamics in Europe.
Yeah.
But didn't have that much impact in our North American reality because of mainly energy sources that we had access to. Now, I think right now, every CEO wants to have a geopolitical advisor because they want to understand how to address these risks. Because as you know, Daniel, you're in business. We were in business before. You know, risk is something you have to deal with every single day as a business. And lower they are, better, you know, you can basically continue and develop your, you know, basically your operations, your products, develop your markets, etc. But I think that right now, the issues linked to, yes, trade and the trade war, the tariffs, but I think the Iran war, you know, the greater competition, the instability, the unpredictability makes it more important for businesses to understand how much social cohesion is important and how much trust is important. Pete, you can talk about what's going on in the US, and, you know, there's been a real concern on this side of the border of the fact that there doesn't seem to be very strong voices on the US side to really, you know, basically address the issues linked, I must say, to our interests, which are the tariffs. And we're working on that. I must say, Daniel, here, this is a Canada moment. We're really working, businesses, the government and civil society together.
Yeah.
It's really a come together moment. We are invested way more in the markets than before. We just announced we would be having a wealth fund, a sovereign wealth fund, which is a conversation that Canada had for years.
Yeah.
And so this is something that is actually, I think, very positive.
Yeah.
Because it brings a sense of stability and control that is also important to when people think about whether it's going well in their country. If they feel that there's a loss of control over their own lives, but in general by the government and by the business sector, they will question even more institutions and the rest.
No,
but anyways, I think that right now it's a good moment for us here.
No, and I think that what's happening in the US has suddenly made kind of the self-interest dimension of this more obvious to business. Yeah. And even in the US, there's polling by leadership now that shows that over 80% of US business leaders are concerned about the legal and political environment, but no one dares to speak up, which is partly why we're doing this work in Europe, because there's still time to do it. But the other part is business agency, because business has agency. Business has been treating political and geopolitical development as external shocks for a very long time. Yeah. And you can't externalize that if you're in business. You need to think about your own role in how do you shape opportunity and how do you engage with the communities where you, how do you shape norms, etc. But Pete, what's your experience in?
I think it is a classic collective action problem where the global business community, the US business community, need a level of stability and rule of law that we do not currently obviously see flourishing in the US. Collectively, business leaders can help promote that, but they would have to choose to do that. And I think the experience of every civil society institution that's come under attack in the US, whether it's universities, law firms, late night comedians, all of them demonstrate that if you allow yourself to be picked off one at a time, you will lose. And if you hold together, you will be all right. And yet it has been difficult for even some of the most well-resourced and powerful people in the US business community to see this. As I often do, I'll return to the municipal analogy. Yeah. So when I arrived as mayor of South Bend, we had lost our main employer, the Studebaker Car Company, 50 years before I became mayor, and that was still the dominant fact about the life of our city when I arrived. Our per capita income was in the neighborhood of $18,000 per person. Whole neighborhoods on the west side of our city had more vacant houses than people living in them. And a huge part of how we turned the corner on that was an alliance of civic leadership, government, business, other anchor institutions, realizing that no one of us had the means alone to turn things around, but that if we were acting in concert, we could get something done. But that requires also political leadership willing to call the tune and to do so in a way that's beneficial. I mean, again, the trade policy, I think, is a good example where the tariffs, at least the IEEPA tariffs, are not trade policy. They are about power. They are a means for, precisely because they were, not really, but supposedly something a president could unilaterally do, a means to flex a kind of power such that any country, company, or industry needing relief would have to personally appeal to one man in order to survive. Obviously, the fact that that was illegal has complicated that strategy, but that strategy has already done a great deal of damage. But if you have a business community that is working to create an environment in which there is a normal relationship, and by the way, that normal relationship will be tense. I say that as somebody who was regulating the biggest businesses in the transportation sector. Of course there's tension. But even at the very same moments where I might be in a tug of war with a given industry or a given company about, for example, airline customer service or freight railroad service, right? We would also bring them to the table. During the supply chain crisis, for example, of 2021, we found that beneficial cargo owners, ocean shipping, labor, customer, a whole bunch of ports, a bunch of people actually weren't talking to each other because they were in a competitive mindset, did not have the trust that you were talking about, Minister. And only we could set the table. And then once we did, there was a level of coordination that helped save the day. We're going to need that much more at a moment when, for example, somebody needs to set a table that the AI companies would come to collectively weigh in or contend with some of the big problems we have. And while I have seen a certain kind of dinner table set where those people sat, that is not the climate that I'm talking about, to have the sort of conversation that we need to have in the US and globally about the future of the economy seen through the lens of what's happening in that sector.
Yeah, thank you. I want to bring us to the issue of institutional trust and institutional renewal, because I think one of the challenges for democracies at this time is that a lot of people experience institutions as distant and opaque and unresponsive. And given what I said in the beginning, that in a certain way, kind of institutional factors are a stronger driver of the political situation we find ourselves in than ideology, you could argue that institutional renewal is actually even more important than policy renewal. And I'm curious, Minister, first of all, I mean, in your time in government, how much have you thought about and worked on things like deliberative and participatory processes, ways of bringing kind of people closer to politics and the institutions closer to the people that they should serve, and how important is that to kind of move politics and institutions closer to people in terms of the trust issues?
I think that, so I look forward to hearing, I know Pete wants to say a lot of things about that, but I think, and you know, I know you wanted to talk about the relationship or the Nordic model also, Daniel.
I'll come back to that if we have time.
Yeah, okay, good. So I really think that Canadians right now believe in the fact that we need to be able to offer a social safety net, but we need to be able to manage the economy, and they expect efficiency.
Yeah.
They expect results.
Yeah.
I think that there's the delays, the over, how can I say, consultants reaching out to with long studies on things. People can't stand it anymore. Now, when you look at our own constitution in Canada, there's one thing that is really fundamental, that is very different from other countries, including the US, is at the core of our constitution is peace, order, and good government. And good government means what? It means that people believe that government work is important for the good of the society, but also that government needs to be, efficient and working for the good of the people in order ultimately for our society to thrive. So it goes both ways. And so I think that in the last years, the good government part was something that people were frustrated with because things were going too fast and it was ultimately becoming very divisive, too slow, and things were ultimately becoming very divisive. Right now, it is about being able to indeed deliver results and address the real issues as they come. There's an Iran war. There's the cost of, gas is coming up. Okay, we're coming up with a support for to address affordability issues. We're always even more reacting. I must say also on the business side, what we're doing is government is playing a bigger role in markets, not only in industrial policies like I was saying, but our goal is to be able to do a bit more like we're seeing particularly in Europe, but really taking shares in companies, being able to scale them, being able to, protect and create global champions. So that's also part of the fact that we have buy-in from the private sector to actually be a good government also, even in thinking of how we're dealing with them.
Private sector, yeah. Great. And, Secretary, I mean, you've talked about the people need to remember that democracy gives them tools and you've also talked about the massive role of money in politics in the US. So I know you have perspectives on this institutional reform and how important it is. So
we're listening.
Yeah, look,
we're all ears.
We need. I'm all for more participatory models, not because they just have some academic or theoretical elegance, but because they work better. The whole premise of the founding of the United States of America was that your everyday life would be better if you had a government that was accountable to you instead of to a distant monarch. So there's not just a thing about form and structure, it's a thing about life.
Yep.
And if that fails, if institutions fail, then people are not wrong to develop a radically negative attitude toward those institutions. And that's what's happened. It is not just one party, but I would argue an institutional failure over the last 50 years that has generated in the US so much inequality of wealth and of power that even the right can no longer ignore it. So much debt and indebtedness that even the left can no longer ignore it. These are failures that go beyond, even though I could argue all day, and often do, why my party is better at it than the others. The reality is we are in an institutional moment of crisis, which is why I increasingly feel, while I view myself as moderate ideologically, I'm becoming more and more radical about what needs to change in our institutions. One of the most elegant qualities of the US Constitution is its capacity to be amended. We've done it, I believe, 29 times. Some of the most cherished things in the Constitution, we forget because we say it all the time. First Amendment. If it's an amendment, that means by definition, it wasn't in the original. They had to add that in. So we shouldn't be afraid of things, including things as profound as constitutional change, which is certainly needed in the case of money in politics. Now, there are other models that are being pursued, both Hawaii and Montana, one by legislation, one by referendum, are trying to do something about money in politics. But it just cannot be that in the United States, which amended its constitution so that you could no longer drink alcohol, and then changed its mind and amended its constitution again. I refuse to accept that we cannot have constitutional change to clarify that a corporation is not the same thing as a person, and that spending money to manipulate a campaign is not the same thing as holding a sign at a protest in an act of free speech. And every part of our government needs real institutional work. It was very lonely 7 years ago when I was running for president, when I suggested that we might want to change some structural things about the Supreme Court, which interestingly, by the way, doesn't even require constitutional change, just a statute. And Bernie wouldn't even talk about the kind of things I was proposing. Now it is more of a mainstream view in my party, and I think largely becoming more popular with the US. When it comes to Congress, we're in this carnival of gerrymandering, when the reality is districts should be fair. Right now, 435 seats in the US House, about 40 of them at most are competitive. That means in 9 out of 10 House races, you know who is going to win before the first vote is even cast. In a 50-50 country, this makes no sense and is one of many things where we tolerate it as though we had no other choice, when actually that's not true. We could have structural reforms that would change that. If I were to sit here and say, in the US, the political system is broken, it would be the least memorable thing I've said all day. It is said so often by American politicians that it's a cliche. The question is, if everybody already agrees the system is broken, how much longer can we proceed acting as though it is not?
Thank you. So I was going to talk about the Nordic model, but I don't think we have time. Maybe I'll give you 30 seconds each, because I mean, I grew up in Sweden in a model which kind of was based on a combination of strong public institutions, a welfare systems, collective bargaining, and the idea that the economy should serve the many. And I think it'd be interesting just to hear a snippet from both of you. You're on the campaign trail now. This is trial. But you know, because I think it's partly about individual policies, it's about delivery, it's about institutional, but this needs to be anchored in some sort of idea of a greater societal project or kind of social contract and economic model. What is your short version of what you would promote, Secretary?
Well, look, American liberals famously admire the Nordics to the point that that's become a cliche too.
Yes.
But you know, things are a cliche because they're true. Statistically, actually, somebody's more likely to experience the American dream of social mobility in Sweden than they are in America. That's a problem. I might even say that on the campaign trail.
You should come.
But the bottom line is,
to Canada.
Look, we could get you. Y'all are great too. Look, I guess the way I put it is we can get you a shorter work week and more money in your pocket and more security for your family. And we can do it with the tools and resources that we have as a country already if we were willing to make different political choices.
And Pete, I want to say in front of everyone how much what you were referring to regarding, basically the system in the U.S. and politics as many is inspiring because, of course, we're following every day what is going on, and what is going on in the U.S. doesn't stay in the U.S. It has an impact across the world. Obviously, here we have very strong rules, but if the U.S. democracy is not working well, it has an impact on all democracies. So just the very possibility of being able to change it, to amend the Constitution, is a very important message that, yes, I hope Americans want to hear, and I can't speak for them because I'm not an American, but I think that the rest of the world would love to be hearing. So I'm just cheering for you on that. As for the Nordics, well, I come from a part of Canada where
it's the Quebec model.
It's the Quebec model, and it's very inspired by the Nordics. Of course, a lot of the initiatives in terms of social safety net in the country have been inspired in the last years by where I come from, including childcare. Of course, our public health system was inspired by the prairies in Canada, but also, is something that you're seeing across the world, and obviously, particularly in the Nordics and in Europe. But I think that we need to show that that system is working and is efficient, and because it is being questioned, and there's a lot of frustration. Because that's, I think, the trust issue linked to the, Nordic Canadian model, which is basically, is the state really able to offer what citizens need? Or is innovation completely impossible? And so that's what we're trying to show, that yes, you can have regulations, you can have lots of services that will be offered, but we will do it efficiently, quickly, and ultimately people will have the same type, we hope, of customer experience that they would have in another, private sector reality, which is, difficult, but we have to aim towards that.
No, and it turns out that sharing a risk across society doesn't only build equity and trust, but it also creates openness to structural change, and it's therefore something that promotes economic dynamism in different ways. So shared prosperity not only is an economic agenda, it's a democratic agenda as well. And I think in addition to delivering kind of the material conditions for a good life, it is about whether institutions can deliver security and dignity and voice for people to feel that democracy still works for them. And I think it is our task at this moment not to become obsessed with the failures of our opponents, and nor to kind of promote an idea of a past perceived stability that also didn't deliver to people, and we've been talking about that. The task should instead be to focus on how do we stand up a different and more dynamic and more inclusive societal project. And I think this has been a really enlightened and positive conversation. So please join me in thanking these two brilliant people.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists for that great discussion on shared prosperity.